Right, shall we move on to question 3? Question 3 was, can maths anxiety be a good thing?
Well, I'm going to ask people to put anxiety on a spectrum, and I'm going to ask you to recollect a very old diagram, the Yertz-Dodson diagram. So if you put people under pressure, productivity improves to a point where if they're under too much pressure, productivity drops off quite sharply. And I think we can use the zone diagram that you've been holding up as a kind of place to hold this, that yes, you can be anxious in the growth space because you're meeting something new, but your brain is telling you it's challenge and it's not a threat to your well-being and your existence. If you get too much anxiety, you've got much less productivity, because we've explained why. And I think there's a muddle when people talk about maths anxiety. They haven't really understood that outside the comfort zone is a little bit anxious place to be for everybody, because you're dealing with something that you don't quite understand. And somehow you've got to find that Cinderella zone, the growth space, and not push it too far. And by developing this language of the 3 zones, we can help people not make the mistake of keeping learners so long in the red space that they're just wasting their time. Does that answer the question a little bit, do you think?
Yeah, is there also a thing over time that it's a good thing if children have experienced this, being consciously aware of experiencing this and have overcome it, and have gradually come to enjoy? I mean, I've had children who've been absolutely here and their behaviour has been awful.
Mm-hmm.
And then suddenly it all clicks into place. It's usually when we've identified and fixed a rung on the ladder that was missing.
Absolutely. I've got a lovely example of that. I was running a reset group for a school in the centre of England, with the deputy head who understood what I was doing with the emotional side of the learning. And this young woman came to the session, and the deputy head's kind of face fell a bit, because this was someone who's known to have a bit of attitude and to be unhelpful in lessons. And she came into the lesson, and it transpired that she had big gaps in her ladder. We were doing y equals mx plus c. And she hadn't understood the fundamentals. And so what we did was we went outside, we lined all the youngsters up with numbers, and we got them to move with algorithms. So move forward twice your number, move back 3 times your number, things like that, and notice the shape of and the pattern of the bodies.
Yeah, I love doing
and if they've got those rungs missing, you get that eye-opening moment. And that young woman was a ringleader for progress after that intervention, because she'd clicked, and now she's a powerhouse because she's got social skills through the roof to help the others. And oh, look, I can do it now, I'll show you. Instead of being a hazard in the lesson, of being a negative influence, she became a positive influence.
Have you seen those children who transform suddenly from being horrible adolescent children in the way that they present to you in class, and are suddenly children again? And they're just...
Well, I'm going to suggest that we interpret some of this, at least ask the question. Maybe there are other things going on, but if 30% of a random group of year 11s is experiencing high maths anxiety, I would suggest that our colleagues put some of this down to angry defensiveness of their self, and that they need to feel safe. And once they feel safe and lessons become curious and enjoying, youngsters are wanting to learn. I fundamentally believe that, and so did Carl Rogers, that we move towards curiosity, we move towards interesting new things, but our brain wants to keep us alive.
So it's a good thing, are we concluding that it's a good thing that for children to experience maths anxiety if they overcome it and learn to become confident that they can overcome it?
More than that, I'm suggesting that anxiety can include nervousness. So it's a good thing to include just enough nervousness that you can interpret it as excitement. There's a lovely paper calling Turning Butterflies into Bows, where you recognise, this is me feeling excited. This isn't me feeling anxious and I've gone into the red zone. This is me thinking, I don't know this. and I'm actually going to have a go at it, like going on a roller coaster, if you like. So just enough anxiety to be increasing the productivity. But if it becomes the level of anxiety that we could basically call threat, so I would say that maths anxiety goes across the growth and the anxiety zone. And I would actually call the red zone now panic rather than anxiety, that state where you can't think. And I would say that we need to distinguish as educators between the orange zone anxiety and the red zone anxiety. And if you put people in the red zone anxiety and we hear that they can't think, they're not feeling safe, absolutely, then we're wasting our time, because those learners aren't learning effectively. Does that answer the question a little bit?
I think so. I'm just adding productive nervousness into the growth zone.
And you said something that's lovely.
Nervousness.
Butterflies.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now there's something else in England. We've had leadership in education which has cherished the idea that it's good for children to be stressed and to fail, because they will learn from that. Now, the obvious result of that has been vast quantities of children in tuition. And tuition, one-to-one tuition, if the parents are funding tuition, is for a lot of children quite a good way. The tutors help them turn around their maths anxiety, get them re-engaged in school, get them back on top of things and take this journey with them. And it just kind of is what's going on, isn't it, Sue, on a huge scale? What do you think?
I'm thinking that a lot more tutors need to know a lot more about the panic space, because a lot of youngsters go for tutoring and it's not productive. And you actually need to go, as you say, be skilled and go back to, okay, what's in your green zone? What can we grow from that? The idea that you can have a policy that basically says the more anxiety, the better, seems to me to be a safeguarding issue. Because if we know that these learners who develop full-blown maths anxiety are going to not be able to do maths, they're going to be reduced income, they're going to be disabled from further progress with anything to do with maths, including any science, any psychology, any geography that's got mathematics in it, PhDs which have quantitative exploration in it. It's a very disabling condition. And so we're at risk of deliberately disabling a subpopulation of the country. And that's actually what's happened. And then saying, well, why can't they do maths? And if you have this idea that all anxiety is positive, you really haven't understood the literature. And I'm going to go back to that psychological safeguarding. Nobody can function well if they're in their danger zone. You thrash around, panicking. I mean, if you've been out of your depth in water, you'll know how it feels. You can't be productive. You're trying to save your life, you're desperate, and your brain's not working to performance. So the waste of resources behind a GCSE resit class that's got a pass rate of 20% is really worrying me, because the kids the young people who don't pass just get confirmed in their sense that they'll never be any good at maths, and they feel excluded, they feel humiliated, they feel disabled. Yeah, it's a form of disability.
I think some children, some communities are successfully navigating the political context we're in by using tuition, and that's typically the case if the parents are well resourced and if it's a small number of children who aren't coping, and most children are coping okay. But there's three big flags on the horizon. One is the schools where, in the more challenged communities, where that support simply isn't available. So the teachers are then teaching vast classes of, most of their children are like that, and they've little resource and support to cope with it. So the challenges they face are extreme because of that political context of pushing children up the curriculum incredibly fast. The second is the youth mental health crisis we've got going on. on a vast scale. I mean, that isn't happening in Finland and places where they're simply not using the extreme stress strategy for trying to improve attainment. And the third is the level of exclusions and children being removed, which is a sign, I think, of this anxiety. I did an interview with Tim Brookhouse and Mick Waters that I published last week. And in it, we were discussing how a child is 1,500 times more likely to be excluded from school if they're in England than if they're in Scotland, where they haven't pursued the kind of strategies that we've pursued in England. So there are some major concerns about that policy environment and that national strategy to increase anxiety.
I hadn't been aware that it was a deliberate strategy. If this is the case, then I think it's even more important that I bring forward the psychological safeguarding agenda. They only talk about psychological safety, as far as I can see, in work environments. It's a construct that's quite new. But way back as far as Maslow, we've known that learners don't learn effectively if they're not feeling safe enough. And I'm not talking about keeping them safely in their green zone. I hope we've established a language here which says we want them in their orange zone, not their green zone. But we need to create that green zone and not.
We need to create the orange zone.
Sorry, yes, we need to create that. There's so many words for this growing space, the challenge space, the brave space, and yeah, if you go back to your green and then red, if that's what's happening and it's deliberate, we're deliberately in that case holding back learners from developing their maths capability. And I would describe that as outrageous.
This is quite a useful book, Faith and Experience in Education, Essays from...
Is that Anne's book?
Yeah, it was edited by Watson, but if you look here at page 153, it quite forensically describes what's been going on at the heart of policy making and the philosophies of ministers and what people have been struggling with when they've been trying to positively influence it. That's quite nice that that's captured there. I know quite a few of the authors of this book. And I've just heard so many direct reports from people who've tried to positively influence policy to understand these issues as to what has happened and what has been said. It's very scary.